Gods curse you, Whateley. Curse you to Hades. Get back, you devils. Back, I say. O God, O Lord, help my poor soul. These were the final feverish words of Howard Marsh, dragged shrieking and pleading into the gloomy waters of the Irish Sea. Even now, 5 years later, I can hear them clearly, assaulting my ears with an abominable, maddening clarity, especially when the encroaching darkness of night diminishes my other senses. In my dreams, I find no salvation, as Howard's awful face, twisted with shock and rage, assaults my slumbering mind nightly. I have not slept a full, restful night since I witnessed his terrible demise, snatched from the jagged rocks beyond the St. Michael's Lighthouse. That edifice is gone now, its brine-soaked masonry scattered across the seabed, destined to slowly erode into pebbles and sand until it joins the abyssal fathoms. Though Howard Marsh's end was of his own doing, pulled away by the very cosmic forces he had once sought to embrace, I cannot help but pity him, for I am not convinced that his physical ruin erased all trace of the man, nor that of the other horror that had shared the lonely lighthouse with him. It is no simple endeavour to write an account of what I witnessed that forsaken night. My hands tremble with every vivid detail I dare myself to recall, and the little courage that remains me is fragile and fleeting. I have tried every earthly prescription known to mankind to blot out that night, especially the dreadful end that befell Howard Marsh, but nothing satisfies. Liquor only makes things worse, bringing on fantastic dreams of things Howard had only hinted at during our final conversation. Morphine, the White Lady, helps erode away the memories I seek to retain, yet does nothing to erase that evening of alien horror. Now, in the hopes that I can finally banish away the nightly terrors for good, and following the advice of Dr. Fleming at Byron House, I will recount in full that lonely, wind-wrecked evening I shared with Howard Marsh in that doomed, crumbling edifice that was once St. Michael's Lighthouse. I had known Howard for nigh on 2 decades before driving out to that lonely stretch of coast to see him. We first met on board the Lady Lenore, a poetic epithet for a dull North Sea oil rig officially dubbed Auk Field Alpha by the Anglo and Nord Petroleum Company. I was his senior then, and I remember him as an energetic young man in his early 30s with a family. He was eager to learn the ropes of working on a rig and possessed an insatiable knowledge for all things. When he wasn't working, he would sit up in his bunk until the early hours, poring over historical texts and scratching down copious notes in his various journals. In those early days, I admit I could not stand him. We nearly came to blows over his incessant midnight scribblings. Eventually, I softened, discovering over a bottle of rum that we were both keen lovers of history and had more similarities than differences. I felt pity for him too. He was the new face among the roughnecks who teased him ceaselessly, ridiculing his appearance, particularly his large watery eyes, small ears, and thick, wide lips. Despite this, he worked hard and earned a promotion quickly. Our foreman, Alan Bishop, a man not easily impressed, took a shine to his strong work ethic. Bishop refused to use given names, barking out Marsh and Whateley whenever he needed our attention, which amused Howard, who also took to calling me Whateley, despite my protests to use Doug. Though he displayed diligence in his work, I always sensed Howard was more interested in the seas around the Lady Lenore than the rig itself. I would often catch him staring out across the crashing waves while on the platform or gazing out of the window in our bunk room during storms. He wasn't on the rig for long, less than 18 months across several long stretches of service. On our final day, he expressed a desire to return home to be with his love, Lavinia, whom I assumed was his wife and mother of his children. We exchanged details, and he promised to write, keeping me abreast of his future adventures. He kept his word. Every few weeks, a letter arrived from the mainland. I recall the first note distinctly, shocked by its contents. He had joined the merchant navy, a strange choice for a man longing to be by his family's side. He explained that service aboard one of Great Britain's commercial vessels would allow him to visit distant and exotic locations he had always longed to see, including several islands in the South Seas I had never even heard of. 5 years later, he wrote that he and his wife had sadly divorced and he planned to immigrate to America, specifically Massachusetts. He explained that he had family living on the East Coast, particularly in the towns of Kingsport and Innsmouth, and he needed their help to unravel some mysteries in his own family tree that had so far evaded him. I lost contact with Howard not long after he left for the States. To my shame, I had put him far from my mind once I retired from the rig and set up a small, painfully banal newspaper agents in my hometown of Barton, Cheshire. I occasionally reminisced about the Lenore and looked over old photographs, and though I had his address, I never managed to scribble more than a few lines before abandoning the endeavour of writing to him. Nearly 20 years after we first met, I unexpectedly received a letter. It arrived with a Cumbrian stamp. I was shocked by its presentation. The handwriting was sloppy, childish even, a stark contrast to Howard's past elegant penmanship, making the first few lines difficult to read. I did not know it then, but the words written on that crudely folded piece of paper would alter the course of my life forever and plunge me into an endless void. Howard Marsh's letter read, "Whateley, I hope this letter finds you in good health. I know that we have not spoken for some years, and I apologise for my lack of due diligence to the friendship we once possessed. The offshore manager of the Lenore was kind enough to furnish me with your new address, and I am happy to see that you have returned to your home village. You spoke so fondly of Barton during our time on the Lenore, and I hope you are settled and happy. Interestingly, I had cause to visit the village a few years back. It is a cruel twist of fate that our paths did not cross then, but I believe you were still working aboard the rig at the time. The gunner's cloth was everything you told me it was, with its tangled briars and bramble-clogged streams. I can see why it has captured the imagination of so many of Barton's residents. I must say, however, that despite the sinister reputation you attributed to the cloth, I felt at peace as I strolled beneath the canopy of its wych elm trees. I am sorry to say that America did not work out quite as I had intended, and I returned to Britain some years ago penniless and destitute. By some small shred of luck, I managed to secure a position as a wickie up north in Cumbria a few years ago, and have been working at the St. Michael's Lighthouse ever since. Unfortunately, we have recently received word that the lighthouse is due to be decommissioned and demolished next week. Apparently, the maintenance for such a remote tower has become too costly to justify. I was wondering if you would care to join me here, at the lighthouse. We have much to catch up on, so how about we share a bottle of something and talk about all that has transpired since we last spoke? I greatly miss our friendship, and the memories of our time together on the Lenore are among the few happy ones I have left to keep me company on these damnable, long and oppressively bleak nights. My last day will be this Sunday. Why don't you drive out here and join me? We can while away the evening with strong drink and talk of times past, and then head up to the tower to watch the sun rise one last time over the lighthouse. Yours, Howard Marsh, P.S. It would be remiss of me to not inform you of this, but I am afraid to say that during my time in America, I have contracted a rare skin condition. Don't worry, it is not contagious in the least, simply a hereditary condition that has sadly been afflicted upon my family for many generations. If you do decide to visit, please do not be alarmed by my appearance. I remain the same man you worked with on board the Lenore. Excited, I tried to call Howard, but there was no number listed for the lighthouse. Replying by letter was impossible, as I had received the note on a Thursday and the deadline was Sunday. I struggled to locate the lighthouse, finally finding an outdated National Road index at the local library in Eastwich, listing a St. Michael's Island near Seascale in Cumbria. The island was far from any town, but I decided the only option was to travel there, leaving my newsagents in the hands of a trusted employee. I set out early Sunday morning. The journey was pleasant enough, though the skies grew darker and more pendulous the further I travelled from Cheshire. Soon, the rain hammered relentlessly, forcing me to turn on my headlights. Visibility was perilously limited as I manoeuvred around twisting bends. After what felt like a lifetime of cautious driving, I saw a sign ahead. Seascale, 2 miles. The road led closer to the churning grey waters of the coast. Deciding a brief sojourn back to civilization was welcomed, I turned towards Seascale, planning to pick up some sundries for Howard. The town came into view quickly, flanked by large empty fields and crumbling, dilapidated properties. Seascale itself was wholly unremarkable, save for the omnipresent sea. Gloomy figures shuffled furtively in the alleyways. I passed a large, squat building being torn down, clearly once prominent, but now a skeleton of rafters and beams. A decayed sign still clinging to a wall read, Scawfell Hotel. I couldn't banish the name Scawfell from my mind, convinced I had heard of it before. I pulled over at a newsagent's and sandwich shop, suddenly hungry. The woman making my ham and cheese butties was friendly. Her husband running the newsagents was not. He lugubriously packed my items. I purchased 2 pouches of Dobie's 7, a 5-pack of Hamlet's cigars, and a bottle of Island Gold rum. Actually, you wouldn't have happened to have heard of the St. Michael's Lighthouse, would you? Supposedly it's not too far from here? I asked. The lighthouse? Aye, there's a lighthouse near here. Can't say I've had much call to visit there. It's out in the middle of nowhere, he replied. I explained I was visiting a friend, Howard Marsh. He frowned and shook his head. No, I don't, and I don't care to. If he's a Marsh, he's not welcome here. He refused to elaborate, saying, let's just say when it comes to Marshes, I ain't got time for them, and we'll just leave it at that. As I turned to leave, he stopped me. You won't be getting to the lighthouse now. The tide's in, won't be out again until, around 8 o'clock this evening, by my reckoning. Howard had said nothing about this. It's what they call a tidal isle. The clerk continued without looking up. There's a causeway that leads to it, but you can only walk it when the tide's out, which at this time of year is either around 7 in the morning or 8 at night. I glanced at my watch. It was barely 1. The causeway was just under a mile or so. I asked if it was safe. He slapped his newspaper down and stared at me. Should be, I guess. There's a handrail attached to it. Just make sure you use it. The causeway's bound to be slippery, especially in this weather. It's safer than it used to be anyway, now that it's covered in concrete. Safer how? I asked. Before they covered it, it was a natural crossing to the island. Or so I've heard the old codgers around here say. The Devil's Spine, they used to call it back in the old days. I suppose it was like that giant's causeway they have in Ireland, made out of those columns shaped like, what do you call them? Hexagons. The clerk snapped at me when I inquired further about the name, telling me to go to the library. Intrigued by the talk of the Devil's Spine, and with hours to kill, I decided a visit to the local library was in order. At the library, which smelled earthy, smoky, and of ancient, yellowed papers, I met the kind librarian, Annabelle, who brought me coffee. I spent hours assembling a spider's web of fragmented stories, folklore, and historical documentation centered upon St. Michael's Lighthouse and the surrounding island. The earliest mention was in the Cumberland Packet paper from 1776, citing Anglican vicar Frederick Cooper. Cooper had delivered fiery sermons addressing reports of blasphemers operating around the Devil's Spine. The sermon spoke of strange noises, dancing lights, and unholy pagan rites occurring when the tide was low. The attached island was named by locals the Witch Mound. A geographical tome revealed it once housed a curious arrangement of stone monoliths, not hewn or smooth, but geometric columns, similar to the hexagonal shapes of the Devil's Spine, only reaching greater heights. The most prevalent folklore was the legend of Long Polly, a spectral hag who haunted the stones with her disciples. Her coven was said to call upon a terrible black demon that lived beneath the isle, involving dark pacts and sacrifices made during Walpurgis and Hallows Eve. Cooper condemned trafficking with the wicked sprite of Long Polly and her hellish imps, and the use of a heathen hieroglyph. Later records mentioned arrests related to these incidents, though details were scarce. Sir Robert Shaw, in his 1906 book Cumberland Folklore and Devilry, recorded an account from a sea-scale man who spoke of strange whistling noises emanating from the rocks when the tide was out and the wind was strong. The sound was difficult to describe, resembling no known speech, but Sir Robert recorded it as something resembling Tekelili. Around a century after Cooper's warnings, the lighthouse was commissioned and built on the island, now named St. Michael's. The stones must have been destroyed and the Devil's Spine covered with steel reinforced concrete. Apart from the strange whistling, reports of devil worship ceased, and later writings were painfully banal. By the time I finished my impromptu investigation, it was nearly 6 o'clock and the sun had vanished. The storm had passed, but it remained fiercely windy and damp. I drove north, struggling with my map in the oppressive dimness. I was about to pull over when I crested a small hillock and spied the St. Michael's Lighthouse casting its lambent beacon. I followed its guiding beam. I parked on a patch of flattened earth overlooking the coast. It was around 7 o'clock, and the bulk of the causeway was still submerged, though I thought I spied the very top of the concrete structure. The beacon's light swept across my car, illuminating everything briefly in a cold, pale glow, before plunging me back into the plutonic depths. Fiddling with the radio tuner, trying to tune out the incessant static, I suddenly became aware of a sound beyond the car. It was faint and distant, a sort of whistling sound coming from the direction of the lighthouse. It was almost like a voice whispering feebly, with a musical melancholy to it, oppressively Stygian and lonesome. As I struggled to make sense of the odd notes, I felt a sudden rise in the air around me. The air was vibrating, ululating in unison to the whistle. I remembered Sir Robert's account, and the words formed before me in horrid clarity. Tekelili, tekelili. A chilling dread gripped my heart. Then the lighthouse foghorn roared out, drowning out the wind, waves, and strange whisperings. What happened next was remarkably abnormal. Almost as if in response to that second mournful dirge, the light of the beacon shifted in its composition, transforming from a pale white glow to a chalcedonic green hue that slowly deepened to a dark emerald. The light was paradoxically both dazzlingly bright and unfathomably dark at the same time, giving off a nimbus of pinks, oranges, and blues on its outer edges, like the aurora borealis. After a few seconds, the bizarre display shifted once more, transforming into a cold green gold. By the time I broke the spell of the light, the tide had fully retreated, and the grey, slimy concrete of the causeway was clearly visible. I grabbed my belongings. Then, possessed by paranoia or some unconscious survival instinct, I retrieved the old service revolver from my glove box. The illegal family heirloom, loaded with 6 brass shells, felt reassuringly heavy in my palm. The small steps leading down to the causeway were hopelessly slick with disgusting briny sludge. I was forced to hold my pocket torch in my mouth to grasp the railing that jutted precariously out of the concrete. I progressed sluggishly, feeling my feet slip on horrid jellied deposits. I could just make out the patterns of hexagonal shapes in the ground where the concrete had eroded and thinned. Every few minutes, the sickly green-gold light of the beacon washed over the causeway, plunging me into Stygian blackness once more. The dread was compounded by the deep shadows, where I half fancied strange sea-dwelling creatures crawling across the exposed seabed. The foghorn sounded again, causing me to jump. After nearly 40 minutes, I reached the island. It was small, consisting mostly of black jagged rocks and slick cyclopean stones, which I imagined were remnants of the hexagonal columns that formed the Witch Mound. A withered, emaciated skeletal tree stood alone to the east. The adjacent stone cottage door, crafted from driftwood, was gnarled and slightly ajar, banging against its frame. Lights were on, but shutters obscured the windows. I wasted no time in entering. The hallway held a coat rack crudely nailed to the wall, with scattered coats, caps, scarves, and 3 sets of large, mud-clogged boots beneath them. "Howard!" I shouted into the deserted hallway. "Are you there, Marsh? It's Whateley." Nothing but the muted winds. I removed my boots and coat. The rooms included a bunk room, a basic kitchen, sitting room, and a study. I placed my bag of sundries on the kitchen counter, hoping to alert Howard, and decided to boil some coffee. The sitting room was dark but cozy, with a log burner glowing with lambent embers. Above the fire, I saw an old portrait depicting a beautiful woman with long, flowing black hair and deep green eyes. On the mantelpiece, I found a small note addressed Whateley in the same atrocious handwriting. It read, "Make yourself at home. Making adjustments to the lens. Will be down shortly." At least he was home. The walls were crammed with sagging bookshelves holding various tomes, novels, manuscripts, and grimoires, an eclectic collection focusing on geography, naval history, folklore, and ocean mythology. I noticed a yellowed frayed manuscript sandwiched between a small leather-bound book titled De Vermis Mysteries and a larger worm-eaten text called Unaussprechlichen Kulten. The manuscript, titled Things of the Water, Gthat Aquadingen, was well read, with notes scribbled haphazardly. It was a treatise on magic, filled with formulas, sigils, rituals in various languages, and queer hieroglyphs. One page had a charcoal sketch crudely glued to the paper, so alien I could not understand the artist's intent. It appeared to show a set of spherical shapes resembling bubbles, mounted upon what looked like a mass of writhing, shadowy tendrils. Peeling away a corner revealed crabbed handwriting reading, "The Danforth Nightmare." The sound of the boiling coffee interrupted me, and I quickly replaced the manuscript. I strained the thick black liquid into 2 clay mugs. Footsteps were approaching from beyond the hallway, from the rickety iron staircase. The footsteps were slow, heavy, and regular, but there was something unaccountably off about the metallic thudding. It was a slapping sound, as if each step was being struck by something wet and damp that momentarily clung to the surface before being peeled away. At the base of the stairs, I noticed a pair of large boots. They were prodigious in size, almost comically so, perhaps 15 inches long, with a vast broadness. The craftsmanship of the heel and arch made them look more like flippers than footwear. My excitement to see my friend after so many years swiftly left as Marsh finally appeared. I almost gasped, taking a few steps back and spilling scalding coffee. He was strikingly tall. He must have gained something like a foot in height and was stooped, leaning forward in a queer, awkward manner. His legs were long, and there was something strange about his knees. He was heavily heaped in thick clothing, a large overcoat, a thick knitted jumper covering his neck, and various scarves arranged around his face. A grey flat cap perched atop his oddly elliptical head. His eyes truly shocked me. They had always been large and protuberant, but now the space between them had unaccountably widened, pushing them far away from each other until they lay almost on the side of his head. They glowed too, briefly illuminated by the hallway light. He bent down awkwardly and struggled to fit his long, flat feet into the makeshift colossal boots. I could not think of any disease or genetic condition that could account for such drastic changes in height, limb length, and countenance. Though he asked me not to be disturbed by his appearance, my reaction was uncontrollable, and I momentarily considered the revolver in my pocket. He walked toward me, lowering his head to pass through the doorframe. Hypnotically, I passed him one of the mugs, which looked like a child's teacup in his large hands. He gestured toward the kitchen and shambled inside. As he lurched toward one of the two chairs, his crooked form was briefly illuminated by the glowing log burner, making him appear even more alien and otherworldly. When he threw himself down, the chair creaked in protest, and parts of his clothing, or perhaps even parts of his body, seemed to ooze and flow beyond its confines. Once seated, he looked toward me with his large, watery eyes, which shined like opals in the firelight. I detected an awful, fishy smell lingering over him, intensifying with proximity. He stared at me in silence, neither eye twitching or blinking. Unable to stand the silence, I pointed to the portrait above the fire. "That's an interesting piece. It's very well done. Is it yours?" He nodded slowly, without breaking his stare. Then, from underneath the scarves, I heard a guttural splutter, a strange choking sound, hideously liquescent. I realized he was speaking. "Yes, Whateley, she belongs to me. A distant ancestor. Innsmouth, Lavinia Marsh." His words chilled me. Certain words like Whateley, Innsmouth, and Lavinia were punctuated with a disgusting, slimy emphasis, suggesting he was fighting abundant phlegm to achieve pronunciation. The way he glared at me when I mentioned the painting sent me into a panic, and I quickly changed the subject, rising to retrieve the rum and tobacco. I returned with the island gold and Hamlets. He was standing up, removing the portrait reverently and placing it by the side of his chair. I poured us each a small draught of rum. I attempted a cheerful toast, but before I could finish, he thrust the glass underneath his scarf and drained the contents. The residue that remained on the glass caused bile to rise in my throat. I poured a second drink, ignoring the sticky mucus clinging to the lip of his glass. He quickly slurped the second down, thrusting his glass out silently, demanding a third. I handed him a cigar, but he refused, pointing to his neck area. I lit mine, sending a cloud of smoke into the air that mercifully masked the fishy smell. "So," I said, "this is the final night for you then. This place is getting demolished next week." "The final night, yes," he replied, his voice still sickening molasses. "And then what? Do you have anything else lined up?" "Return to sea." He flatly refused any interest in work on dry land. He gestured for the bottle, and to my horror, he shoved the whole bottle beneath his scarf and drank greedily and directly from it. Attempting to drown out his horrid slurping, I asked why he visited Barton. Family, kin in Barton, Marshes. I mentioned the strange Marsh family, including old Sebastian Marsh. Sebastian lived in a strange cottage in the Gunner's Clough that was burned down years ago. I wondered what happened to him. "Returned to sea," Marsh replied. I realized he had meant returned to Seascale, and I had interjected too soon. I noted the Marshes seemed to share a bad reputation in both Barton and Seascale, adding, "To hear the old codgers tell it, you'd think the Marshes had come straight out of hell." I suddenly became aware again of his shocking physical appearance. He did look like something that had crawled out of the pit, and I shuddered, imagining what he looked like beneath his layers of concealing clothing. I continued talking, desperate to maintain the illusion that I was speaking to a human. I recalled Sebastian having a nephew, Robert, who went insane and was locked up at Byron House, developing an intense phobia of reflected surfaces. "Robert," my host replied. I continued, pointing out that my family, the Whateleys, were related to the Marshes, perhaps distant cousins, as were many families in Barton. Marsh continued to stare, not nodding or questioning, his reticence unnerving me. I switched to discussing my research at the Seascale Library. As I talked about the Devil's Spine, the Witch Mound, and the legend of Long Polly, he leaned in closer. I felt he was growing suspicious of me. When I reached the topic of the strange whistling sound, Tekeli Lee, he shot up from his seat with alarming celerity and placed a hand toward me in protest. He tilted his head toward the door, angling it as if waiting to hear an echo from the corridor. When no sound came, he slowly sat back down. I put on more coffee. I glanced out the window. The tide had returned, and the island was surrounded by black, churning waves. As the green-gold beacon swept past, I swore I saw another kind of movement in the undercurrent, ripples of something else beneath the surface, like a large school of fish swarming. Marsh was rising from his chair again, taking the portrait of Lavinia. "Is everything all right?" I asked. He pointed to the ceiling. "The beacon, must check." He left the room, stooping and shambling out, his flat, slapping footsteps slowly fading up the tower staircase. Relieved by his absence, I retrieved the manuscript, Things of the Water. Something in that odious tome lodged itself in my mind. I reasoned that Marsh's telltale footsteps would alert me to his return. Flicking through, I came across hideous pages of forgotten lore, monstrous sketches illuminated by the dying fire embers. Freakish entities named Ubosathla, the Unforgotten Source, Hastur the Unspeakable, and Great Cthulhu, the last said to slumber, dead but dreaming, in the phantom city of R'lyeh, deep beneath the gloomy waters. I returned to the sketch marked The Danforth Nightmare, finding a cross-reference titled Shoggoth of the Lost City. This creature was a disgusting mass of black tendrils and ocular spheres. Another reference led me to Dagon's Mirror, which showed an ancient woodblock image of an ornate mirror decorated with carvings of disgusting hybrids of human and fish and other oceanic creatures, amalgamations of octopi, anemone, and crustaceans. Then, a small folded piece of paper dropped onto my lap. I unfolded it and found a letter. "Dear Mr. Elliot, the Ubo formula you sent me did indeed work, and through it I was able to glimpse the depths of Yhantley, and beyond even that to the corpse city of R'lyeh. I cannot say where I will make the trip to first, providing of course that the sign works as intended. As you are already aware, my time on this plane is fleeting, and the transformation has only been accelerated by my use of the formula. The mirror is indeed a conduit between this earth and those who dwell outside. Its original purpose, as far as I can tell, was to call them down from the stars, as well as spy upon those who dwell in different times and different spaces. Its creator is believed to be none other than Abdul al-Hazred, the author of that dread tome we call the Necronomicon. I have also read, however, that it is even older than this, hailing originally from some unnamed city of brass domes and rubied spires that once dominated the southern plains of the lost Hyborian age. The Order of Dagon, fearing that the mirror could be used to summon the dread protoplasmic horror from beyond the 6,000 steps, had the thing removed from Innsmouth, where it eventually found its way into Dunwich. They could not destroy it, for even the deep ones fear the reprisals of he who is not to be named. My grandmother, Lavinia Whateley, through her inhuman father, inherited the mirror and fled Innsmouth with that rogue warlock, Abner Marsh. I cannot tell you exactly how I came to acquire the mirror. However, as promised, should you find time to attend the next Walpurgis Sabbath, I will introduce you to Mr. Pendle's latest form, as well as that extraordinary painter of nightmarish canvases, the immortal Mr. Bickham. This will be my last letter to you. For now, recite the incantation of the Black Goat every 7th night, and you will know the faceless things of the air who take their body from human blood, and you may call upon them to take you to the Sabbath, should you choose to join me there. It is likely that by this time, my transformation will be complete, and I will be in a much stronger position to show you the final seal that will awaken the Shoggoth. I am yours in the name of Father Dagon and Mother Hydra, Sebastian Frederick Marsh." I reread that last line several times, stunned. This must be the same Sebastian Marsh I had just discussed with Howard. Could this manuscript have once resided in that crumbling cottage in Barton? I sat in the dark, the coffee long since cold. The fire had almost died, and I threw more logs onto the embers. The waves outside roared, accompanied by a howling wind. I must have drifted off into a dreamless sleep, the last restful sleep of my life. The blast of the foghorn awoke me, jolting me as if struck by a thunderbolt. It bellowed out again, shaking the cottage walls. The waves were crashing with an intensity I had never heard before. Peering out, I saw the black, roiling mass only 20 or so feet away. The sea had risen to engulf most of the island. Frantically, I made my way toward the tower staircase. Upon reaching the doorway, I was once more greeted with the god-awful, fishy stink that clung to Howard. His large, misshapen boots were placed at the base of the stairs. I began my ascent, the feeble beam of my pocket torch struggling against the oppressive darkness. A glow, that same phantom golden green, emanated from the very top. Then I noticed the first piece of discarded clothing. One of Howard's scarves, covered in translucent jelly, something akin to frog spawn. Avoiding the mass, I found more articles as I climbed. A coat, more scarves, a jumper, a cap, even trousers. Each was either dripping with a gelatinous mess or encrusted with a stale yellow-green deposit that resembled fish scales. The last article, a stained vest, lay just outside the service room at the top. The foghorn had ceased, but other sounds came from beyond the trapdoor. The awfully familiar slapping sound of Howard's large feet pacing above me, and voices. One was a croaking, coughing, guttural sound I took to be Howard, and the other was a softer feminine voice, seductive and gentle. I ascended the ladder and gingerly pushed the trapdoor open just enough to see and hear. The glow was blinding. The lens had ceased revolving and was fixed in place. Attached to the lens, by means mechanical and electrical, was an object that almost caused me to cry out, Dagon's mirror. It was hideous, resplendent in its full ornate horror and oceanic regalia. The light made it difficult to see, but I saw a figure I took to be Howard, given his odd proportions. He paced back and forth, each movement a blasphemous mockery of human gesticulation. He turned to face the mirror each time he spoke. The woman's voice almost echoed around the chamber, with no obvious source. "The stars are right," she spoke. "The blood of this last offering will awaken the spawn of Ubo-Sathla, that blasphemous abomination without form from beyond the 6,000 steps. It will awaken Father Dagon and Mother Hydra from the fathomless depths, and we will dance and frolic for all time." "But he is my friend," Howard's voice replied, somehow clearer and more human than before. "I gave you the keepers here. I gave you my wife, my children. How many more? You promised that when this was over, I could go back. I don't want to be this thing anymore." "And you shall, my child," the woman promised. "The old ones have that power. They can reverse the process, if that is what you truly desire." "It is," Howard replied, stopping before the mirror. "I don't want to go back to the sea. I don't want to dance forever in the dark. Pickman was right. I don't want to live forever." "Then give me this man, this Whateley. Allow him to take your place. His blood will open the final seal and awaken the Shoggoth. You will be free. You will return to the wretched world of men." "Yes," Howard proclaimed, the guttural, phlegmy tone returning, drowning out his momentary humanity. "Yes, what I desire." "Then bring him to me," she continued. "Bring him and you will be free of your great burden." Movement. With terrifying alacrity, he was upon the trapdoor. The light from the mirror struck me as the trapdoor flew open. I heard a terrible sound of shock and ravenous excitement ejaculated from his inhuman lips, and then a gnarled claw reached out and grabbed me, pulling me off the ladder. I was lifted up into the chamber. "Fool," he spluttered. "They want you, Whateley. They are taking you, not me. Down to the depths you go, down the 6,000 steps to the Shoggoth." I fumbled frantically for the old service revolver. My other hand hopelessly tried to wrangle free from his vice-like grip. My fingers moved across his awfully wet and scaly arms as he lifted me, taking me toward the mirror and the sardonic laughter of the unseen woman. "Howard!" I screamed. "If you're in there somewhere, please let me go. I don't want to hurt you." He laughed. "Hurt? Me? You cannot hurt me. I am eternal." I found the revolver, cocked the hammer back, and pulled the trigger. The shot boomed. I must have struck something, for he cried out in pain, though his grip did not cease. I fired again, and this time he mercifully let go, roaring with an inhuman cry. Now on my knees, I fired a third shot. It missed him, ricocheting off the iron window frame and striking the surface of the mirror. I heard a deep, low cracking sound, like a whaler breaking thick Arctic ice, followed by a crystalline shattering as the brilliant radiance vanished, plunging the entire chamber into blackness. A million shards cascaded to the floor, accompanied by the faint cry of a woman screaming out in pain. "No!" Howard screamed, his bulk floundering on the floor. Mad with panic, I leapt down through the trapdoor and toward the staircase. I heard something heavy drop behind me, followed by the frantic slapping of inhuman feet. The speed of my descent was prodigious. Each article of discarded clothing caused me to jump several sets of stairs in one bound. I heard my pursuer roar behind me, spitting out curses and threats as I reached the bottom. I hobbled forward to the driftwood door that led to freedom. In one last burst of mad hysteria, I turned heel, closed my eyes, and fired the remaining 3 shots in the direction of the stairs. The first 2 missed, but the last found its mark, and I heard another scream of rage and pain. I sprinted toward the door, slamming into it with my shoulder. The wind outside howled madly, and the black waves were barely 10 feet from the cottage. It was then I saw the sight that mercifully permitted me to pass out. The waves were frothing and foaming, not from the wind, but from the mass of hideous creatures breaching the surface. A nightmare legion of unblinking eyes and slimy mouths. A horde of batrachian monstrosities, resembling the awful fish frogs carved onto the frame of Dagon's mirror. They bleated and croaked, hopping in and out of the lapping waters in a ghoulish frenzy. I cursed that I had no shots left, wishing I had saved one for myself. Behind me, Howard suddenly cried out in panic. Turning, battered by wind and waves, I saw the waters surround the cottage entrance, breaking the windows and flooding the inside. The horde was upon Howard, clawing at him, pulling him into the water. A dozen flabby claws clung to his scaly body, dragging him into the briny depths where he belonged. "No!" he screamed in panic, his human voice returning to plead with his captors. "I don't want to go! Take him! Leave me be!" Though his body was identical to that of the fish frogs pulling him down, a vestigial likeness of the man I once knew was still stretched across that monstrous face. He looked at me with all the malice he could muster. As I felt the sweet embrace of nothingness consume me, those final words cried out in the coming darkness that I happily welcomed. "Gods curse you, Whateley. Curse you to Hades. Get back, you devils. Back, I say. O God, O Lord, help my poor soul." It was morning when I finally awoke. The sight of the amber sunrays breaking over the Cumbrian countryside was glorious. The Irish Sea was now calm. The lighthouse and the adjacent cottage were no more, lost forever and scattered across the seabed, home only to clinging barnacles and skittering crabs. The island it had once sat upon and the causeway leading to it were barely visible over the morning's retreating tide. They never found Howard's body, nor the bodies of the 3 men who had worked at the lighthouse. I later learned that Trinity House, the authority responsible for maintaining the St. Michael's Lighthouse, had no record of a Howard Marsh in their employ. Though he is gone, I think of him often. I have dreams, vivid, terrible dreams in which he is forced to eternally dance and frolic in the forgotten and fathomless depths of the corpse city, forced to live forever as one of the fish things, longing for the day when he and the rest of his kind shall rise up out of the ocean and reclaim the earth in the name of Father Dagon and Mother Hydra. The horror he and Lavinia had sought to unleash has been dispelled, yet I cannot help but wonder what became of the mirror. Surely it is gone, its 1,000 shards swept out across the seabed, its hideous frame bent and warped by the waves' ceaseless crashing. But I wonder if such a thing can ever truly be destroyed. And what of the Shoggoth? Has that formless horror been returned to its eternal slumber beneath the 6,000 steps that lay deep below the witch mound? I can only pray that it has. And yet, every night I hear it. Whenever Howard creeps into my dreams and I see his awful face and hear his awful voice, there is something else. Something outside, something beyond. I can hear it now as I write down these words. Te Kelly Lee. Oh God, it's here, the revolver.